Imagine for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, suppose I were to tell you that there is strength in being alone. What if I told you that God is speaking to you, molding you and preparing you for something more significant amidst the silence during the times when you are standing by yourself? I am aware that many of you are probably wondering how being by yourself could ever be considered a blessing. I want you to understand, my dear friends, that the most profound work that God accomplishes in our lives frequently takes place while we are alone and in quiet. The silent, small voice of God becomes the loudest when the distractions fade away and the clamor of the world is subdued. This is the time when the world is quiet the most. The pursuit of solitude is not something that a lot of people engage in voluntarily. Considering that we live in a world that is constantly filled with noise, diversions, and the hectic pace of life, the concept of being alone can frequently strike us as unpleasant or even uncomfortable. On the other hand, there is a profound and potent truth that may be found within the opportunities for isolation that God provides in order to bring you closer to Him. There are numerous instances in the Bible that emphasize the significance of solitude, such as when Jesus went into the desert to pray, and when the Apostle Paul spent years in seclusion in order to develop his commitment to the Christian religion. In point of fact, the most deep work that God does in our hearts and lives is frequently the work that He accomplishes while we are alone and in states of silence. When you are alone yourself, there is no noise or pressure from elsewhere that might divert your attention away from the presence of God. All of the disturbances that come from the outside world, the voices of other people, and the hectic nature of everyday life gradually recede into the background. When the world is clamoring for your attention, it is in this place of silence that God can begin to speak to you in a way that is difficult to hear out of all the noise that is going on around you. For many people, the concept of sitting in silence is so foreign, since they are so accustomed to being surrounded by noise. On the other hand, it is precisely in these times of silence that God feels the need to connect with you on the most fundamental level. It is simple to forget about the close connection with God that is so essential for our spiritual well-being when we are surrounded by others, when our calendars are packed, and when our phones are constantly ringing. This, however, is a mistake that we should avoid making. Without genuinely allowing oneself to be fully present with God, we might pray in passing, recite a few words, or attend church services. All of these things are examples of prayer. At the same time, however, when we are alone ourselves, we have the chance to establish a more profound connection with Him. In the presence of solitude, we are able to concentrate on the presence of God and pay close attention to His voice. Since the situation is one in which distraction, during these times when you are by yourself, God has the opportunity to bring you closer to Him and reveal aspects of yourself that you may not have fully understood or acknowledged before. God is able to begin to expose the condition of your heart when you are away from the commotion of life and in the silence. When you are away from the chaos of life, sometimes we find ourselves carrying loads, wounds that have not healed, or worries that we are not even aware are hurting us. Those things are brought to the surface by God when we are alone, which gives us the opportunity to address them and put them before Him on our own. He does not do this in order to condemn us. Rather, He does it in order to heal us, to cleanse us, and to bring us closer to His love. Self-reflection is another benefit that can be gained from solitude. What was the most recent time that you took the opportunity to truly focus on the condition of your soul? When was the last time you took some time to sit quietly and give yourself permission to come to terms with the aspects of your life that are in need of God's intervention? In the midst of the hectic pace of our regular lives, we frequently fail to make the time to engage in this activity. Yet solitude, which refers to the times when we are alone with God, affords us the opportunity to contemplate our current state on a spiritual, emotional, and cerebral level. During these times, God has the ability to disclose to us areas in which we may improve, places where we can find healing, and the next steps that we should take on our journey with Him. In order to perfect us, God utilizes solitude. During the time that you spend in His presence, He will begin to eliminate distractions, both external and internal, and will mold you into the person that He has called you to be according to His will. Even while you might not always see the immediate benefits of this process of refining, you can have peace of mind, knowing that God is continually working in you. God, your character is being refined, your faith is being strengthened, and you are being prepared for the work that He has that lies ahead of you. In the same way that gold is polished in the fire, our faith is frequently refined when we are alone in the presence of God. Solitude is a tool that God utilizes to strengthen our faith in Him. In situations where we are by ourselves, we frequently find that we are in a vulnerable position. There is no one else to whom one can make a request or on whom one can rely. In times like these, we have to make the conscious decision to put our complete faith in God. In situations where everything is going well and we are surrounded by people who are encouraging and supportive, it is simple to put our faith in God. However, when we are alone ourselves, when we are confronted with difficulties, or when we are in a state of uncertainty, then is when our faith in God is put to the ultimate test. It is for the sake of learning to rely only on God that God enables us to expand our faith. Thank you. It is His desire for us to comprehend that He is sufficient, that He is faithful, and that He is always present with us. God bestows in us the gift of solitude. The purpose of this time is not to be a period of isolation or despondency, but rather to be a period of closeness and connection with the Creator. These are the times when we are brought closer to Him, when our hearts are healed, and when our trust in His plan becomes deeper. During times of solitude, God will build a connection with you that goes beyond the encounters that are initially encountered. There is a desire on His part to meet you where you are in order to communicate with your heart and to guide you into a more profound comprehension of His love and the purpose He has for your life. It is common for people to view being alone as a terrible experience, one that should be avoided through any means possible. Due to the fact that people equate being alone with feelings of loneliness, isolation, or a feeling of being abandoned, they are afraid of being alone. What if, however, solitude may be a potent instrument for the development of one's spirituality? Imagine for a moment that God is providing you with the opportunity to contemplate, grow, and increase your faith during those fleeting moments of silence and apparent emptiness. If you allow yourself to be alone in the correct circumstances, you will find that it is an opportunity for introspection and spiritual growth, both of which are necessary for your relationship with God. Being able to take a step back from the hustle and bustle of life and properly analyze where we are on a spiritual, emotional, and mental level. When we live in a world that is always changing and full of distractions, it is simple to become engrossed in the routine of our daily lives and neglect to take the time to focus on our own internal state. In times when we are alone ourselves, free from the distractions of outside forces, we are afforded the chance to reflect inside. We are able to conduct an honest evaluation of our lives, our behaviors, and our connection with God while we are in these periods of silent reflection. When we are alone ourselves, we are able to assess our reasons for doing things, our desires, and the challenges we face. We have the ability to pose challenging questions to ourselves, which we may otherwise ignore. Due to the hectic nature of our lives, what kind of relationship do I have with God? To what extent do I live in accordance with His will? What are the aspects of my life that I need to delegate to Him to be taken care of? In order to answer these concerns, we need to engage in profound introspection. And the seclusion that God frequently places us in provides the opportunity for this kind of contemplation. It is possible for us to be completely honest with ourselves and with God when we are not distracted by the demands and diversions of other people. This will allow God to shed light on the parts of our lives that require healing and reform. We are also able to recognize the areas in which we have failed, where we have sinned, and where we require the grace and forgiveness of God. When we engage in self-reflection, we are able to seek God's pardon and confess our shortcomings while we are alone and in the serenity of solitude. Solitude provides the sacred space that allows us to examine our souls and come before God with humility, which is especially important in a world that frequently hurries past the concept of repentance. It is not about condemnation that this contemplation is about. Rather, it is about reconciliation. Recognizing the areas in which we have failed to meet the expectations and returning to God with a heart that is contrite is the essence of this. We discover restoration and healing in His love through the process that we are going through. We are able to obtain clarity on our life's mission when we are able to devote some time to ourselves. The calm little voice of God that is leading us towards our true calling might be difficult to hear. This is because the noise of everyday existence can make it tough to hear. There is a possibility that we will become disoriented regarding the course of action that we ought to pursue as a result of the expectations of others, the demands of society, or our own ambitions. However, when we are placed in situations where we are alone ourselves, we are afforded the opportunity to listen to God's guidance with greater clarity. God talks to our hearts about the next steps He wants us to take, the aspirations He has set inside us, and the purpose He has for our lives. While we are alone, He does this. When we are alone, the experience of being alone can be a potent moment of discovery during which we are able to hear the voice of God more clearly and acquire a sense of direction for the future, but want to experience spiritual growth. One must first make a profound commitment to transformation, and isolation is the context in which this transformation might take place. The times that we spend alone ourselves are frequently times when God uses us to mold our personalities, polish our hearts, and strengthen our faith. In the presence of solitude, we are able to rid ourselves of the distractions that impede our spiritual development. So allowing God to work more effectively inside us by taking advantage of these opportunities, He might bring to light areas of weakness or regions that require healing. For instance, He may expose patterns of thought or behavior that are not in accordance with His Word. And when we are in His presence, we can start the process of transformation. In addition, solitude enables us to develop a more profound connection with God, which is a significant benefit. There are no other voices competing for our attention while we are by ourselves. If there is only the two of us and God, and this one-on-one connection has the potential to bring about an intimacy that is difficult to experience in the midst of the chaos that is life. With this very personal connection, God is able to communicate with us in a manner that is specifically designed to meet our unique need. God speaks to us in the quietness, asking us to draw closer to Him and experience His presence in a meaningful way. This can be accomplished through the reading of Scripture, the recitation of prayers, or the contemplation of calm moments. One of the things that we learn to do when we are alone is to learn to rely on God more completely. We are more likely to rely on our relationships, our resources, and our own strength when we are surrounded by other people. However, when we find ourselves in these situations, we are reminded that we are afforded the opportunity to place our whole dependence on His power, wisdom, and provision while we are alone. And it is during these times that we are able to demonstrate a deeper level of confidence in Him. The experience of being alone teaches us that we are never truly alone, since God is right here with us at all times. And in His presence, we discover everything that we require. In order to cultivate a relationship with us that is more genuine and personal, God allows us to spend time alone sometimes. We are able to reflect on our life, seek God's guidance and progress in our spiritual path when we are able to do so in those moments of silence and aloneness. We give God the opportunity to refine us, to heal us, and to increase our faith when we think about ourselves and reflect on our lives. We come to learn to rely on God more completely during these times, and we are able to feel the depths of His love and presence in ways that we might not have access to otherwise. Solitude, which is not something that should be avoided, becomes a priceless gift from God, one that enables us to develop and be transformed into the persons that He has called us to be. When we find ourselves in a situation where we are by ourselves, it is simple to have a sense of disconnection from the world, from other people, and even from God at times. However, the Bible contains a fundamental truth that states that God frequently uses these times of seclusion to reveal the genuine purpose that we were created for. Instead of being a period of time in which we are left alone or abandoned, solitude has the potential to transform into a sacred space in which God communicates with us, molds our lives, and guides us towards meeting the calling that He has put on our heart. The fact of the matter is that when we are by ourselves, we are afforded the opportunity to become more sensitive to the voice of God, and it is in the midst of this silence that we learn the path that He desires for us to take. Throughout the Bible, there are numerous instances of individuals who were living by themselves before to being called to fulfill their most important missions. And it's before God summoned him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness where he was alone and isolated from the rest of the people. Moses was molded and perfected by God during that period of time. His experience taught him to rely on God for his provision, guidance, and strength. Even though he was by himself, he was able to get himself ready for the significant calling that God had put on his life. In order for Moses to be able to take on the duty of guiding the people of God, he was required to first endure an experience of quiet solitude. While Moses was in the wilderness, he was confronted with his own frailties and insecurities. However, it was also during this time that he was given the ability to fulfill the purpose that God had for him. In a similar manner, after accepting Christ as his Savior, the Apostle Paul went into seclusion for a period of time. The momentous meeting that Paul had with Jesus on the way to Damascus prompted him to withdraw into the desert for a length of time in order to engage in introspection and spiritual development. The vastness of Paul's mission to be a light to the Gentiles and to spread the gospel to the ends of the earth was revealed to him by God. During this period, for the first time, it is difficult to conceive of how Paul could have been prepared for such a gigantic undertaking if he had not had the opportunity to spend time by himself. During that time of seclusion, God made his purpose more abundantly clear, purified his character, and provided him with the fortitude he required to persevere through the numerous challenges and difficulties that he would encounter in his career. During times of solitude, we are freed from the distractions and the pressures from the outside world that frequently determine the course of our life. We are left to confront our authentic selves when we are freed from the intrusion of noise and the views of others. This is the place where God frequently encounters us and reveals to us who we are and what it is that we are specifically commanded to perform. We are able to hear God more clearly when we are alone, and in the peace that comes with being alone, it is precisely during these times that He communicates with us about our lives, our hearts, and our lives with us. When we are surrounded by the noise and confusion of the world, God has the ability to begin to unveil our ultimate purpose in life in ways that are impossible to comprehend. The more we are alone, the more vulnerable we become. And it is precisely this vulnerability that makes it possible for God to act in us. When we are alone, He is able to reveal the wants and dreams that are buried deep within our souls. There are times when we need to be by ourselves in order to fully comprehend the extent of our own desires, interests, and abilities. When we are in a state of silence, God has the ability to kindle a fire within us which will motivate us to pursue the goals that He has been planting within our hearts. When we are surrounded by other people, we are frequently too preoccupied to recognize these desires. Nevertheless, when we are alone, they come to the surface, and God is able to show us the manner in which we should proceed. When we are by ourselves, we have the opportunity to clear our minds of any distractions that may have been obscuring our perspective. The voice of God can be difficult to discern when we are preoccupied with other commitments, like as relationships, careers, and other obligations, because there are so many conflicting demands on our time. God, however, has the opportunity to work on us and within us when we take a step back from the commotion and find ourselves alone. He elucidates our purpose and bestows upon us the insight that we require in order to pursue the life that He has called us to live at this period of time. We are able to hear God's voice more clearly and comprehend what He wants for our lives when we are alone, because it removes the excess that we have, surrounded us by difficulties and problems that are willing to overcome. There are times when God's plan for us is not completely accomplished in a single instant, and it is essential that we acknowledge this fact. In order to completely comprehend the calling that God has for us, it is sometimes necessary to spend some time, exercise patience, and be in solitary. It is a set of steps. God does not always provide us with a complete picture at the same time. Rather, He frequently reveals our purpose in phases, directing us step by step as we make our way through the process. God is able to reveal His plan for us in a manner that is unique to each of us and adapted to our specific path when we are alone with Him. During those times when we pay attention to what He has to say, our purpose becomes more transparent and we start to comprehend what it is that He desires for us to do with our life. It is impossible for us to rely on other people for confirmation or validation while we are by ourselves. This is a part of the process of understanding our purpose that might be difficult, but is vital. However, God does not want us to base our sense of self-worth or identity on the judgments of other people. We discover that the only source of our validation is in Him when we are alone. It is only when we are able to fully accept our identity as God's cherished children without the need for constant approval from others that we will be able to fully step into the purpose that He has set for us. It is through time spent alone in His presence that we are able to cultivate a more profound comprehension of who we are in Christ and what we are obligated to do. During times when we are alone ourselves, God not only reveals our true purpose, but also gives us the strength to endure the trip that lies ahead. As we increase our level of comprehension and intelligence, we also increase our level of strength. Because God gives us the opportunity to be alone, we are able to equip ourselves and get ready for what lies ahead. God strengthens our resilience by teaching us to rely on Him completely and to have faith in His plan for our life. During those times when we are able to be still and silent, in times when we are alone with God, He strengthens us to pursue the purpose that He has given us, regardless of the difficulties or obstructions that we may encounter along the way. It is not a curse to be alone, rather it is a blessing. During times of solitude, God exposes our true purpose, makes our mission more clear, and provides us with the tools we need to prepare for the future. When we allow ourselves to be alone for the purpose of introspection and development, we make room in our life for the possibility of discovering the wonderful calling that God has placed on our lives. In a world in which we are always connected to other people, it is simple to overlook how important it is to cultivate a profound and intimate dependence on God. When it comes to overcoming the difficulties that life throws at us, we frequently rely on our connections, technology, and our own capacity for strength. However, what happens when all of these external supports are taken away? God encourages us to have a more profound dependence on Him during those times when we are alone ourselves. Not only is solitude a time for introspection and spiritual development, but it is also an opportunity to learn how to rely on God in a more complete manner, even when we are by ourselves. We are reminded that He is the ultimate source of our strength, knowledge, and guidance. This is especially true in the peaceful moments of solitude. In situations in which we are alone ourselves, we are compelled to confront our weaknesses and weaknesses. We come to the realization that we cannot rely on our own strength to traverse the obstacles that we are confronted with when we are not distracted by other people. The world gives us many opportunities to learn how to be self-sufficient, how to handle things on our own, and how to persevere through challenges without seeking assistance. Nevertheless, God invites us to live our lives in a different manner. As we spend time by ourselves, we are reminded that we are not intended to bear the responsibilities of life by ourselves. The desire of God is for us to rely on Him and have faith that He is with us at every stage of our journey. A feeling of vulnerability is frequently experienced when we are alone, since it is precisely in these circumstances that we are compelled to confront our own limitations. The support of others or the diversions of our busy lives are not sufficient reasons for us to conceal ourselves. We are the only ones who are affected, and we are confronted with the fact that we require God more than we are aware of. The presence of God becomes even more important when viewed through the lens of this vulnerability. While we are in a state of weakness, He comes to us and demonstrates that His strength is more than sufficient to take us through everything. As we gain the ability to rely on God, we start to feel a greater feeling of peace, since we realize that we do not have to navigate life on our own. It is possible for us to have faith that God will provide us with guidance and power, even when we are feeling weak or uncertain. Another benefit of solitude is that it gives us the chance to give over control of our lives to God in a world that gives us the impression that we should be in charge, that we should have a plan, and that we should have control over our circumstances. It can be challenging to let go and trust in God's plan. On the other hand, when we are alone and quiet, we are reminded that we do not have control over the situation. It is not possible for us to control the path that our life will take or to predict the results of every circumstance. On the other hand, we can have faith that God is in charge and that His plan is superior to anything that we could have conceived of working out for ourselves. Through the experience of being alone, we were able to remove the illusion of control, leaving us with the sole option to truly trust God and submit ourselves to His plan. When we are alone, God teaches us to rely on Him for everything, not only when things are challenging, but in every facet of our life. This is something that we learn from God during times of isolation. God wants to be our guide in every aspect of our lives, whether it be in the decisions we make on a daily basis, the relationships we have, or the work we do. Because we are not subjected to the burden of external expectations or the diversions of other voices. We are able to listen more attentively to the direction that God is providing. Through time spent alone, we gain the ability to prioritize seeking His will above all else, and to have faith that His plan for us is good, even when we do not fully comprehend it. We develop wisdom and discernment as we learn to rely on God for guidance, and we learn to make decisions that are in accordance with His will for our lives. Whenever we do so. Additionally, when we are alone ourselves, God has the opportunity to develop our faith. The decision to put our faith in God is something that we have to make consciously when everything around us is uncertain, when we are alone ourselves and vulnerable. This kind of trust is not something that comes easy. The ability to let go of our own understanding and to put our faith in God's competence to manage our lives is a prerequisite for this. On the other hand, it is precisely at these times of uncertainty, when we are by ourselves and unsure of what the future holds, that our faith is put to the test and becomes stronger. When we make the decision to put our trust in God, regardless of our uncertainties or worries, our faith grows. Through this experience, we come to understand that He is trustworthy, that He would never abandon us, and that He is always with us. Even in the most isolated times of our lives, the more we learn to rely on God in the stillness of solitude, the more we come to understand that He is nothing more than what we require. In the process of relinquishing our autonomy and learning to rely on Him, we come to realize that God is able to meet all of our requirements successfully. It is possible for us to have faith that God will supply us with the strength, wisdom, and direction that we require, regardless of whether we are experiencing difficulties in our personal life, our careers, or our relationships. The time spent by ourselves teaches us that we do not have to have everything sorted out because God already has a plan predetermined for us. Having faith in Him, leaning on Him, and relying on His dependability is all that is required of us. In order to polish our hearts and strengthen our dependency on Him, God allows us to spend time alone. It is in the stillness that we come to realize that we are not intended to bear the burden of the world by ourselves. He is our pillar of support, our source of wealth, and our leader. The more we learn to view time spent alone as an opportunity to rely on God, the more profoundly we are able to experience His presence in our lives. During those times when we are alone, God teaches us that He is sufficient, and that through Him we are able to confront any problem with self-assurance. We should not be afraid of being alone. Rather, it is an opportunity to deepen our dependence on God, to have faith in His unwavering faithfulness, and to encounter His power in a manner that will completely alter the course of our lives. It is possible for us to have feelings of abandonment or forsakenness when we are by ourselves. Nevertheless, in truth, God frequently provides us with solitude in order to refine us and prepare us for the challenges and responsibilities that lie ahead. God wants to use these times of isolation to work in us, to teach us, and to prepare us for the tasks that He has set before us. God molds our personalities, strengthens our faith, and fortifies us for what is ahead. While we are alone and surrounded by solitude and calm, God utilizes our time alone to teach us about who we really are, which is one of the most powerful ways He uses solitude. Because of the hectic nature of life, it is simple to become preoccupied with the world around us. It's a constant source of acceptance, recognition, and affirmation for us. However, when we find ourselves in a situation where we are by ourselves, we are no longer able to rely on those external sources of validation. Confronting our own selves and asking ourselves who we truly are is something that we are compelled to do when we are alone in these moments of solitude. We are left to discover our worth and identity in Christ alone, free from the distractions that come from the opinions of other people. For the reason that we are unable to completely accept the purpose that God has for us until we have a firm grasp on who we are in Christ. This is an essential component in the process of refining. When we are by ourselves, we have the opportunity to investigate our hearts, our reasons for doing things, and our desires. We are able to conduct an honest assessment of the condition of our hearts and inquire as to whether or not we are living in accordance with the will of God when we are not surrounded by the noise and distractions of the world. Whether it's a hidden sin, an incorrect attitude, or an unhealthy desire, God has the ability to disclose all of the aspects of our lives that need to be given to Him when we are alone with Him. When we are alone ourselves, we have the opportunity to expose ourselves to the scrutiny of God, and to give Him the opportunity to cleanse our hearts. The areas in which we have room for improvement and development are brought to our attention by God during these times of silence. Because of God's ability to develop our character through isolation, there is no one else to impress, no one else to please, and no one else to rely on when we are by ourselves. Because of our vulnerability, God has the potential to mold us into the persons that He desires us to be. He has the ability to expose our shortcomings, bring to light our pride, and draw our attention to the areas in which we need to cultivate greater humility and patience. Being by ourselves compels us to acknowledge our flaws and to put our faith in the power of God to bring about our transformation. This is a period when we have the opportunity to allow God to purify us, to make us more patient, more loving, and more caring about others. We have the opportunity to allow the character of God to be formed within us as we commit ourselves to the solitude that we are experiencing. During times of solitude, God teaches us to rely on Him for both strength and direction from inside. When we live in a society that places a high emphasis on autonomy and self-sufficiency, it can be challenging to acknowledge that we require assistance. On the other hand, when we are alone ourselves, we are reminded that we are not intended to navigate life on any given day. It was never intended for us to be able to bear the burden of the world without the assistance of God. The experience of being alone compels us to acknowledge our reliance on Him. When we find ourselves in situations like these, we learn to pray to God for the wisdom, strength, and direction that we require. It is through time spent alone that we acquire the ability to put our faith in God's provision and to seek His direction in every aspect of our life. Spiritual development can also occur during times of solitude. We are afforded the opportunity to concentrate our complete attention on our relationship with God while we are by ourselves. We have the ability to delve more deeply into His Word, spend more time in prayer, and listen for His voice when we are separated from the distractions of other people and obligations. Being by ourselves provides us with the opportunity to develop a closer relationship with God when we are free from the stresses and obligations of everyday life. We are able to concentrate on our own spiritual development. During these times, God has the ability to communicate with us in ways that we would not be able to hear if we are preoccupied with the surrounding noise of the world. This is because we are able to hear the voice of God more clearly and experience His presence in a more profound manner when we are alone. As a result of this closeness, we develop a deeper comprehension of His will and become more in tune with His plan for our life. The transformation that occurs while we are by ourselves also helps us get ready for the future. God frequently makes use of these times of peace and quiet in order to prepare us for the duties and obligations that He has in store for one another. In the same way that He prepared Moses throughout the wilderness and Paul during the desert, He prepares us during times when we are alone. It is precisely in these times that God fortifies us, deepens our faith, and provides us with the resources that we require in order to effectively carry out our vocation. Since God is aware of what is ahead, He employs solitude as a means of preparing us for the difficulties that we shall encounter. The formation of our character, the strengthening of our relationship with Him, and the strengthening of our dependency on Him are all examples of the ways in which God is at work in us. As during periods of solitude, with the purpose of preparing us for what is to come. We can also learn to believe in God's timing when we are alone, which is another benefit of being alone. It is in the stillness that we are compelled to wait for the ideal plan that God has for our life. Despite the fact that we live in a culture that places a high value on instant outcomes, God's timing is frequently not the same as our own, and we put too much pressure on past outcomes to mold us and buy degrees in our outcome. By spending time alone, we are able to develop the ability to believe that God's timing is always perfect, even when it does not correspond with our own goals or expectations. Despite the fact that this waiting procedure is not always simple, it is necessary for our development. When we are alone ourselves, we have the opportunity to give God control of our timeline and to have faith that He is working everything out for our benefit. Patience, endurance, and faith are all skills that we acquire through this waiting, for the purpose of molding us into the individuals that God has called us to be. God employs the process of solitude as a formative tool. God works in our hearts, exposes our true identity, and improves our character during these times when we are alone. Aloneness teaches us to depend on God, to trust in His timing, and to rely on His guidance. Through solitude, God prepares us for the future, equips us for our destiny, and draws us closer to Him. A time of solitude is not a period of abandonment. Rather, it is a period of divine preparation during which God refines us and prepares us to execute the vocation that He has set on our lives. Even when we are alone ourselves, it is possible to have the impression that the entire world is conspiring against us. It is possible to experience feelings of isolation where we feel as though we have been abandoned or that no one knows what we are going through. On the other hand, it is precisely in these times that God is able to perform the most profound work in us. When we are alone, even though it is challenging, we have the opportunity to become entire. God frequently prepares us to experience a deeper connection with Him via isolation, a relationship that is not impacted by the distractions of the world or the opinions of others. This connection is not influenced by the opinions of others. In this place, God has the ability to assist us in recovering from previous hurts, overcoming our fears, and maturing into the people we were always meant to be. When we are by alone, we are compelled to confront our brokenness in a manner that is accessible to us when we are surrounded by other people. For example, it is at the times when we are alone and it is quiet that the hurts that we have buried deep within us emerge to the surface. It is not uncommon for us to carry around unresolved sorrow without even being aware of it. Because of the progression of life, we tend to divert our attention to things like our responsibilities, relationships, and accomplishments. The distractions are removed, and we are no longer able to ignore the agony that is buried deep within us. We find ourselves in a situation where we are by ourselves. It is important for our healing that we experience these moments, even though they may feel overpowering. It is through moments of solitude that God is able to offer healing to the most profound layers of our hearts. When we are in these situations, He does not leave us alone. Rather, He utilizes them as an opportunity to repair us, to demonstrate that He is close by, and to assist us in letting go of the wounds that have been caused by the past. God gives us the opportunity to let go of the fears that are preventing us from moving forward when we are alone in the stillness of isolation. Fear is frequently one of the most significant obstacles that we face in our development, since it keeps us mired in cycles of insecurity and uncertainty. We might be afraid of being rejected, of failing, or of the unknown. Fears like these have the potential to impede us from embracing the calling that God has placed on our life and from walking into the destiny that God has planned for us. On the other hand, when we are alone ourselves, we are frequently compelled to address these concerns in a manner that compels us to confront. During this time of solitude, we are afforded the chance to submit our worries to God, to put our faith in Him, to handle our concerns, and to release the hold that fear has on our life. God has the ability to utilize these times of alone to free us from the chains of fear that have been preventing us from moving forward. By being in His presence, we are able to start walking in the freedom that He provides, gaining a deeper understanding of how to trust Him and facing the future with self-assurance. Being alone also enables us to have a greater awareness of ourselves. When we live in a world that is rife with distractions and pressures from the outside world, it is simple to lose sight of who we really are. It is possible for us to lose touch with our own identity. If we allow ourselves to become as preoccupied as we are with the views of other people or with matching the expectations of the world. However, when we are by ourselves, we are afforded the chance to contemplate our authentic selves, to comprehend who we are apart from the roles that we perform or the titles that we carry, to rediscover our passions, our values, and our purpose. Solitude provides us with the space to do so effectively. During these times of peace and calm, we are able to hear the voice of God, which serves to remind us that our true identity is in Him. These days, we are not defined by the labels that the world ascribes to us. Rather, we are defined by who God says we are. The development of this self-awareness is an essential step towards becoming the people that God intended for us to be. The more we allow ourselves to be alone, the more we start to build a deeper sense of trust in God's ability to provide for us. We learn to be self-sufficient, to take charge of our situations and to make things happen on our own through the experiences that we have in everyday life. However, when we are alone ourselves, we are reminded that we are not designed to accomplish everything by using our own might. For as long as we can remember, God has intended for us to rely on Him for all of our requirements, including our needs, our wisdom, and our direction. It is frequently during the times when we are the most alone that we come to terms with the fact that God will provide for our requirements. In the stillness, we are reminded that God is trustworthy and that we do not need to be afraid, because He would never abandon us or leave us behind. On our journey through life, when we are alone ourselves, we should not become anxious. Rather, we should lean on God and have faith that He will give us the guidance and the strength that we require for each and every moment. It is not always the case that the transformation that occurs when one is alone occurs instantly. Healing from past wounds is typically a process that takes a long time. Getting over our worries, rediscovering who we are, and learning to trust God more completely are all things that do require time. Nevertheless, each and every hour that we spend alone ourselves is a step towards being the people that God has called us to be. It is a period for personal development, a time when we can purge the old broken pieces of ourselves and give God the opportunity to restore us to our original state of completeness. The more we give ourselves over to God in these times, the more His love and grace mold us into the people we are meant to be. It is also true that solitude strengthens our connection with God. It is at moments of solitude that we are afforded the opportunity to get closer to Him, free from the distractions that the world presents. Because God desires for us to have a close relationship with Him, isolation is the ideal setting in which to spend time in His presence while we are alone. We have a greater chance of remaining still and listening for the voice of God when we are by ourselves. In addition, to seek His direction, the more we give ourselves over to God during these times of peace and silence, the deeper our connection with Him becomes. Our sanctuary, our source of strength, and our source of comfort are all derived from Him. In the process of learning to rely on God during times when we are by ourselves, we come to realize that being in His presence brings about a profound sense of serenity and fulfillment. A period of solitude is not a period of hopelessness. Rather, it is a period of profound transformation and spiritual revitalization. During this time, God has the ability to heal us, prepare us, and guide us to become the persons that He has made us to be through His guidance. We learn to have a deeper trust in God, to confront our anxieties, to recover from previous wounds, and to find who we truly are when we spend time alone. God is at work molding us, refining us, and pulling us closer to Himself at those unassuming moments when we are not paying attention. An experience of solitude is not a period of abandonment. Rather, it is a holy space in which we come into contact with the love, healing, and direction of God. The only place where we can find completeness is in the solitude.